Well, welcome to Budget for Archivin. Our budget coverage continues, and this time around we'll understand what was there on the tax side in the budget that was laid by the Finance Minister earlier on. We have our tax panel with us, Pranav Sehta, tax partner EY. There's Dinesh Kanabar, CEO Dhruva Tax Advisors, and former Deputy CEO KPMG joining us on the panel as well. And there's Bobby Parikh, Chief Mentor BMR and Associates LLP on the panel too. Good evening to all three of you. Pranav, I'll start off with you first. What were your top three ideas that you thought, tax amendments or tax changes that came by in the budget?
I thought GAR was very much expected, and it's a very, very welcome deferral of GAR. 2 years seems to be reasonable as well. The fact that he has grandfathered investments made up to 31st March 2017 is again a very welcome move. So I think that's the big positive. The fact that corporate tax rates have been reduced in a phased manner, to be reduced in a phased manner over 4 years is a welcome step as well. MAT, I thought, was quite a dampener, not really the way we expected it. It's only for FIIs earning capital gain on the stock exchange that he's reduced MAT or said that MAT will not apply. That may actually impliedly mean that it applies in all other cases to foreign companies. And the fear, of course, is the revenue probably will say that the very fact that for FIIs earning capital gains on the stock exchange, MAT does not apply means that generally otherwise to foreign companies it does apply. Today, generally the interpretation is and the custom is that foreign companies not having a presence in India in the form of a permanent establishment are not subject to MAT. So actually the amendment, if it is made, might impliedly suggest something different, and therefore one hopes that it is clarified that it applies to all foreign companies not having presence in India. So I think these three will be my top items in this budget in terms of discussion points.
Yeah, maybe that was an oops moment, and let's see if that gets clarified or no. But Bobby, knowing Pranav the way I do, I doubt he misses too many points. But anything else that stood out for you which Pranav hasn't spoken about?
So I think two other points. One is the whole business on indirect transfers, which is the sort of Vodafone transaction which happened a few years back and led to a retrospective amendment of the income tax law. It's been an amendment which has actually hurt many transactions, but with no clarity on how those provisions actually operate. So retrospectivity aside, what the budget has, now seems to have done is to bring clear rules into how those provisions should operate, which is something which was awaited and which is a good thing to have. And that provides clarity for all those kinds of transactions, which actually has been a big pain point. The other one is, which has been mixed, I think, is from what I can see, is the whole tax provisions and the taxation framework around REITs and infrastructure investment trusts, where there was a framework which was introduced last year. It wasn't particularly conducive, and there was much hope that this budget would fix the gap so that we could actually see REITs getting off the ground. I think what has been achieved so far is that there has been one clear wish which has been or desire which has been addressed by the budget. But there were a few other matters which are also fairly critical to the economics of a REIT, of an effective REIT framework, which don't seem to have been addressed. And so we have to think more about how this is going to play out and whether we will see actually REITs happening in the market in the coming financial year.
Dinesh, opening comments from you as well. You want to add to that list?
A couple of things. I think first, maybe from a directional framework, after a long time, I have seen a finance minister talk about stability and provide a framework of a rate of tax at least for the next 4 years. We haven't seen that happen. So when somebody comes back and says we are at 30, we need to go down to 25, and this is how we'll go about doing it, a very, very welcome thing. Second is the abolition of wealth tax. A very welcome move, because it was a lot of work for all individuals and corporates. Substituting it by a 2% increase in surcharge is again leading to a tenfold increase in collection, but really without making any tax laws any more complex at all. So I think a very, very nice, very welcome move. Just imagine you don't have to do filings, assessments, appeals, all of that gone. And the third thing I would talk about, which I think is really a good step in the right direction. For one of the biggest issues where litigation is happening in taxation is in the field of transfer pricing. And transfer pricing, as you know, applies when there is a transaction between associated enterprises, one which is Indian, other which is overseas. And The threshold limit for that at this point of time was 5 crores. The threshold limit has been revised to 20 crores. Now, that's not a small tinkering around. We are now saying that entities which have transactions up to 20 crores will not have to comply with transfer pricing provisions. Only others have to. And when you are of that size of more than 20 crores of associated enterprises transactions, you really do have the sophistication to carry out transfer pricing. So I see a step in the very right direction in respect of these 3 items. You know, Pranav earlier mentioned about, or rather Bobby mentioned about indirect transfers and a lot of clarity which has come around there. I think I'm seeing still some misses out there. One is that there is a need for a pro rata taxation for which rules have yet to come about, and I'm a little bit worried as to how those rules will come about. There is an exemption for de minimis transfers, which is up to 5%, whereas the recommendation from the SHOAM committee was 24%. But barring that, a very, very welcome change.
Actually, I was going to come to that we broke this story, I think, day before yesterday, that the threshold limit of 50%, there was no clarity earlier, and now there is clarity, and that itself is a big thing. But Dinesh, I believe you're saying that there could have been some more things that could have been done there. Yeah, so the simple thing there is that let's assume there is an overseas transfer, but that transfer is, let's assume more than 50% value resides in India. But this is a transaction which does not result in a change of control. It's, for example, there's a listed entity. So one of the suggestions was that listed company changes should be outside the purview. There are known examples, the WNSs of the world, the iGates of the world, where everyday shares are being transacted. So there were a number of suggestions. One was exempt listed company transfers. Second was exempt de minimis transfers, meaning where there is no change of control. So what has happened is there is no exemption for listed companies. There is a change for de minimis, but that's up to 5% of the equity of the company as opposed to the SHOAM committee recommendation of 24%.
But broadly, you would also agree, Pranav, the fact that this would encourage a lot of cross-border M&A, some focus and thrust being laid on that front?
Oh, absolutely. The fact that it reduces uncertainty, brings about clarity when it comes to cross-border transactions is very, very well received, and I think it's a great welcome step. There might be some minor items there, but I think by and large they've addressed most items. They have said more than 50% or 50% or more of the value coming from India alone would get covered. Below 5% they've exempted foreign reorganizations subject to certain conditions. They have said even if more than 50% comes from India, only proportionate capital gain is to be taxed. So I think in terms of bringing about stability, certainty, clarity in the law, I think it goes a very long way. A little bit will always remain, and I think in terms of practice it will come about as we go along. I think generally, therefore, this is a good budget. By and large, I think also a smart budget. If we look at the steps that he's trying to take, he doesn't have too much fiscal room right now. So what he's trying to do is give incentives, but at the same time only for a very short term. So we see GAR, we are saying foreign investors welcome up to 2017. If you invest, your capital gain is protected probably perpetually or permanently. So he says invest now for the next 2 years, it's good time to invest. Even when it comes to incentives, exemptions, he says I'll withdraw them. But gradually as the corporate tax rate goes down, so for the next 1 or 2 years maybe he's promoting investments. So all in all, he's trying to give a fillip to investments in the short term and trying to say that over the long term you'll have a much better, lower corporate tax rate, globally competitive corporate tax rate. So smart budget, I think, overall.
Yeah, okay, stay on, gentlemen. So much more to speak about. Let's take that very, very quick break. We come back and continue our conversation with all our 3 experts on the key takeaways of the budget on the tax front. All right, back with this special discussion on the post-budget implications on the tax front, both direct and the indirect tax front, and in conversation with our 3 experts. And, Bobby, I want to come to you. We had a ratings person in our studios, and he mentioned that there could have been more done to, bring out decrease in the interest expense for the government for the next 3 or 4 years. And one of the things that could have been done would have been to get more indirect taxes. I mean, he made points about how luxury goods could have been, taxes could have been increased on some luxury items, so on and so forth, essentially widening the tax base. And maybe even these black money laws that have been brought in is probably done with that intent as well. Do you think enough was done in this budget, or could a couple of more very, very simple points been brought about?
Well, I think, what he's done is that he's increased the service tax rate by 2 percentage points. He's increased excise duty by some amount. There has been a contraction of the items which are excluded from service tax levy. So that list has been pruned further. So I think a fair amount has been done, and really if there is a map that we are going to get to GST, then to play around with individual items and the less tinkering that is done, the better it is, because what you need is everything's going to fall into one sort of all-encompassing law, and you don't want to create friction and sort of changes at the margin, which might achieve something for this year, but which actually really distort what has to happen from a GST construct perspective. So I'm not so sure that. So I'm actually happy that there isn't. The lesser the sort of distortion, the friction that's created, the better it is. Sorry, what was the second part of the thing?
No, that is the only part. But Tanvi, do you have a question?
No, I just wanted to come to Pranav, since he highlighted, on the GST front, and we have to ask you about that. Pretty much on expected lines, the announcement that came by, there was some section in the market that believe that, a number would be specified. But how did you kind of take on board the overall assessment that he laid for GST, the timeline, the implementation, and how pro GST implementation he sounded in the budget, which has been his pet project?
Yeah, so he was very clear that April 16 is the target date for introduction of GST, which has been said previously as well. What I think would have been good to have would be a clear roadmap of the timelines of each of the steps. So when does he feel the constitutional amendment will be passed? When does the GST bill itself get ready? When will the rules be announced, and so on, so that industry knows clearly what's the roadmap between now and April 2016. That's something that I would have been happy with. As regards the number, I can understand that I don't think the GST rate, or what exactly would be the revenue neutral rate, which would be the final GST rate, is something that he could have come out right now, so I'm okay with that. But I would have been happy with at least a clear roadmap with a timeline as to by when various things would happen between now and April 2016. That would have been a great plus for industry to get ready to welcome and embrace GST.
Dinesh, I somehow want to sneak in a market perspective since I talk about the stock markets. Two things that people were probably hoping for. One, that the MAT clarity on FIs, and I think that came about. Postponement or deferment of GAR by 2 years, that was the minimum or the least expected, and that has come about as well. Do you think enough was done to keep the FIs happy? I mean, there were some changes even on foreign fund managers and their location characteristics as well. Do you think enough was done on that front?
I would think so. As Pranav alluded to earlier, there is this anomaly at this stage that if it's only the capital gains income which is exempt, that applies only to FIIs. So again, what happens to other FPI? What happens to interest, which suffers tax only at 5% on ECBs? And therefore, would there be a book profit tax? So one would have hoped that that was larger ambit. But from a market's perspective, since you mentioned this, all the three items. First is to clarify that presence of a manager in India does not create a permanent establishment is a positive. Number two, the fact that there is no MAT on FII is again a positive. And the third is that GAR has been postponed by 2 years. All three are very positive from that perspective.
Bobby, comment on REITs, and I think we would just want a quick round of opinion on that as well. From a market standpoint, that would be key too. While they have made the instrument more attractive from a tax standpoint, allowing some exemption on long-term capital gains tax for exit by sponsors, would you have been more happy to hear something done for foreign investment in REITs?
So that actually, is not strictly a budget issue, because that has to be addressed by the FDI policy and whatever comes out of the Reserve Bank. So it should happen, and really, I don't know that it particularly needs a mention in the budget itself. But there were a few other issues in the REIT taxation framework which were I think there was a big hope that, or there were certainly many representations made to try and find a way in which you could sort of cap the tax at the rate of tax, the tax that the SPV suffers, and then not have a distribution tax. But that doesn't seem to have been done away with. So I think the yield arithmetic, I think, still remains an issue. And then there is a few other technical issues. There is, when the developer contributes assets into the REIT, he could potentially be liable to MAT, and there's no relieving of that, which is coming through in the budget. There were representations made that maybe we should get these SPVs, allow these SPVs to convert into LLPs, and then waive tax on the conversion, specifically if they were converting for the purpose of going into a REIT. That's also not happened. So I think that there were expectations that existed, and what the changes don't go all the way in terms of addressing those. And to that extent, there will be some people who will be, not entirely satisfied with what's come out in the budget.
Pranav, you want to add to that? I also thought that there was an expectation that FPIs would be allowed, and I believe that there has been no clarity on that front as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would feel while it was not necessary to be part of the finance bill, of course, because it doesn't require an amendment to the Income Tax Act, but
what to your mind was a glaring miss, or something that was a hit but we haven't touched upon it?
There are 2 points which have happened really, I think, deserve mention. First is this entire emphasis on business. I think the second change is that if you are that you are sort of or would really welcome that, but only one is hoping that this power is not abused, because when I see in practice that when officers can really go after you and there is a threat of imprisonment, what can that lead to? The provision made by the finance, or the proposition paid by finance minister, that is going to sort of set up a committee to look into how payments beyond a particular amount, even if not claimed as a tax deduction for personal purposes, could be made using a credit card, is a very, very welcome thing. In fact, that was something which FICCI, and I chaired the FICCI tax committee, we had made this recommendation, and I'm glad he has accepted that. If that happens, really you will see a broadening of the tax base, and really that's a very, very welcome thing. The second point I just would like to table is a new provision which has been sought to be introduced, which is with regard to residence of companies, where the proposition is that a foreign company, if it has got a place of effective management in India, would be regarded as a resident of India and therefore liable to tax in India. I'm just a bit concerned about how these provisions will play out, particularly where you have Indian companies which have got subsidiaries overseas and some part of the management is in India. Really, how will one play this out is something which remains to be seen. So these 2 are, I think, important things. One miss I might just put is that I do wish that the finance minister would have done something on a settlement mechanism where one could really resolve matters rather than to carry them in litigation. There were a number of suggestions made to him, and I wish some of them would have found favor with him.
Okay, fair enough, Dinesh. Hope the finance minister is listening. Bobby, come to you. Your final thoughts. How would you summarize what this budget entailed for taxpayers?
So, I think that there are two thoughts that I had in my mind. One is something which Dinesh briefly touched upon. We do have a big issue with tax disputes and tax litigation, and this has to be, so the government's been going on also about it's they who use the word tax terrorism, and they sort of keep on making the point that they want to provide for a more stable, less adversarial tax regime, and there's a number of different actions which need to be taken in order to be able to address this problem. And so I would have thought, at least as far as the budget is concerned, that there should have been some more emphasis on dispute resolution and to find ways in which alternate channels and alternate ways in which disputes could be resolved, so that the one route that we have right now, which is choked, gets relieved to some extent, because there are alternate forums which are created to which taxpayers could turn to depending on what their assessment of the different forums was. So that's one thing, and I felt that there should have been some more focus on how dispute resolution was going to be facilitated more comprehensively than any mention of it in the budget. The other thing I think which is sort of connected with this whole issue of why do disputes arise? So disputes arise because laws are not clear, because there is ambiguity, because in many situations there is no clarity of the principles underlying or the objectives underlying the changes that are often made or when provisions are introduced into the income tax law. And the budget documents and the tax proposals get accompanied by a memorandum which is meant to explain why each of those provisions was introduced and what the objective is. But if you read those documents, historically they provide very little clarity on what the underlying intent is to make a change in one way or the other. And the government has last year also said, and through the year has also indicated that they are going to find ways in which they can provide ongoing clarity so that things become more clear, ambiguities get removed, and compliance becomes easier. So I would have thought that if that has not really happened, but maybe they could have made an example out of the budget itself and changed the way in which they wrote that explanatory memorandum to really explain why they are going about doing what they are doing, what was the provision before, what led them to change it to something which is different now, why do they want to make that change, how is it going to impact people, why should there be a mystery to, why do we need to sit and interpret and try and infer what the intentions are, why can't they just make it clear? And they could have set an example and demonstrated how they are going to go about bringing more clarity, and to that extent I think there was an opportunity which we've missed.
Okay, Pranav, I just want a more macro view on this entire issue, because a lot of focus this time around was laid on how India perhaps has a lower tax to GDP ratio compared to other countries, especially emerging markets. Do you think the finance minister has done enough to address that issue, to kind of, make it core to bridging the fiscal deficit over the next 2 to 3 years? Has the roadmap for that been laid?
I think if we talk of tax to GDP ratio, there are 2-3 ways in which it can be addressed. One is, of course, increasing the tax base itself and bringing more taxpayers into the tax base. I think he is trying a little bit here, and some beginning has been made in terms of black money and the steps that he's trying there. The second step, I think, is in terms of improving compliance, and the third would be efficiency in the tax administration. I'm not too sure too much has been done on that front. So the way I look at it is much more could have been done. Looking at the budget overall, I think I would have felt 2 things probably would have made me much happier. One is I don't see too much happening on the tax administrative reform side. We have several papers now, reports, all with us. Enough work has been done, research has been done. But a clear roadmap to that particular administrative reform would have gone a long way in building trust and confidence and bringing back that kind of affinity between the tax collector and the taxpayers. And second is a little more on the infrastructure side, and a boost to manufacturing and investments into those would have really helped. So I think these 2 things, the administrative reform and some amount of fillip for infrastructure and manufacturing, would have probably gone a long way. We have this 194 LD which has been extended by 2 years, concessional withholding tax rates on interest on rupee bonds so far as QFIs and FIIs are concerned, and some tax-free bonds. But other than that, not much to channelize investments and savings also into these sectors.
Can we just come in a little bit? There was this huge expectation on what would happen on Make in India initiative. And again, I didn't see anything significant out there. We had this additional depreciation for investments in Andhra Pradesh, Telangana. We had this reduction of royalty rates, withholding rates, and abolition of SAT. But beyond that, nothing very significant, one would say.
Well, maybe another day, another time, 12 months down the line, let's see if it happens or no. But for now, gentlemen, Pranav Sehta, Bobby Parikh, Dinesh Kanabar, thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us and giving us this perspective, this quick post-budget analysis on the tax front. And from Tanveer and myself and the team that put this show together, thanks so much for watching.